Okay, so I'm here to talk about busy. Now, when people talk to me about busy, they say three things. They say, I'm overwhelmed. I've got so much on my plate. They say, I've just got this frenetic set of activity where I race, I juggle, and I cram, which leaves me at the end of the day feeling exhausted. And I feel, in the background, a quiet sense of failure. That actually I'm failing to do the work that I really think I should do at work, or I'm failing to be the parent or the partner that I want to be. So the big question I'm asking is, why are we so busy? I want to introduce you to a really stupid fish. Now this is a Siamese fighting fish. Now, if you put enough food in its bowl, it will literally eat itself to death. Now that's not terribly smart, but we could say that the reason for that is there's too much food. But actually, lots of fish wouldn't eat themselves to death. I think the problem isn't that there's too much food. I think the problem is it keeps on choosing to eat. It can't help itself. Are we any different? Just out of interest, how many of you slept with your phone by the bed last night? Okay. And how many of you reached for your first shot of email before you had your first shot of caffeine? Okay. The point is we can't help ourselves. Actually, one study found that if you gave the choice of being idle and not consuming anything or electrocute yourself, people chose the electric shock. We're hooked on activity and stimulation, which is kind of fortunate, really, because there's a lot of it around. In the years before the 20th century, the world's knowledge, the complete knowledge of the world, would double every 100 years. By the mid-20th century, that had accelerated to every 25 years. IBM recently calculated that in a couple of years' time, the world's knowledge will be doubling every 11 hours. Now, in the face of that, and also increases in communication and demand, we feel frenetically busy. But are we busy because there's too much to do? I think that fails to learn the lesson of the Siamese fish. I think we're busy because we keep on choosing busyness. I think we're busy because we can't help ourselves. Now, us Northern Europeans, what do we do when we went for holiday in the past? We'd roll up our sleeves, and we'd show our arms, hold arms together to see how brown we were. That was our post-holiday tradition. What do we do today? Whip out our phones, and with a kind of pained expression on our face say, I had 3,000 emails when I got back from holiday. To which the person next to you says, well, I had 4,000. And you've just been out-busied. Now, the point is, not only do we brag ceaselessly about our busyness, we compete. We don't even do that. We ask other people, are you busy? Really, because we're too polite to say, are you important? Or are you successful? And it's kind of natural that, because we evolved in a scarce world where there wasn't enough of anything. And so where more was self-evidently a good thing. And we've learned that more equals success, whether that's more stuff or more productivity. But is it? Is that the way to succeed these days? Since the mid-80s, the amount of information that we're all cramming into our brains has increased by 5 times. Over the same time period, though, the amount of content that we're all producing has increased by 200 times. Now, if you hold those numbers together, 5 times more consumption, 200 times more production, that only says one thing to me, that most of our productivity is just white noise. And yet we still can't help ourselves. Imagine you're at a buffet table. Now, if you're anything like me, you go to a buffet table and you see chicken korma, and you think, oh, chicken korma, I'll have some of that. You see sweet and sour pork, and you think, thank you. And you see seafood pasta, and you think, oh, yes, thank you. And you end up with a plate piled too high that's a complete mess that you would send back to the kitchen if anyone ever served it to you. And yet we do it to ourselves. Now, why? It's because we ask the wrong question. We ask whether or not I want chicken korma, whether or not I want sweet and sour pork. Now, I like those things. So the answer to that question is always yes. But we do the same in life as well. We ask whether or not we should do those emails, whether or not we should go to that meeting, whether or not I should take up kite surfing. I'd never heard of kite surfing 5 years ago, and suddenly it's an important thing to me. Added to my list. Now, the point is, whether or not only works when we can do everything. If we can't do everything, consistently choosing for more just squeezes stuff out of our lives. And it squeezes out the important. One study found that 58% of knowledge workers were so busy because they'd taken on so much, they had no time to think. That can't be right. Knowledge workers not thinking. Now, the question we should be asking, or the question we shouldn't be asking, is whether or not we should go to that meeting. What we should be asking instead is, which is more valuable? Going to that meeting or spending an hour working on that report? That's the real choice. Which is better for me? Going kite surfing or playing Lego with my children? The problem is when we try and do everything, we actually achieve nothing. So what we should be doing is asking which, and therefore doing less, but just a lot better. Now, if asking which is one of the ideas that might help us deal with overwhelm, how do we deal with this frenetic sense of activity? A lot of that is to do with distraction and temptation, because it turns out the temptation of busyness, of checking email, going onto the internet search, is actually harder to resist than sex and chocolate. Now, in the face of that, we just can't help ourselves. We swivel between activities. Oh, I'll just check a bit of that. Oh, and we go between different things. And actually, office workers are switching attention every 3 minutes. Now, we can do no serious thinking in 3 minutes. And actually, one researcher found that we achieve 40% less, we get 40% less done when we change so often. But actually, that's not my biggest concern. My biggest concern is the experience of all that changing, all that switching. It's a bit like the psychological equivalent of shaking up a snow globe. That's what mentally it looks like, or it feels like, just chaos. In psychological language, it's called a psychic entropy. It's a deeply unpleasant state, but it's also an exhausting one. If you think over the last few weeks of the times when you really did some great thinking, or where you were really happy, without exception, it'll have been times when you allowed your attention to linger for longer on something that really mattered to you. It turns out we don't switch on either our ability to focus or happiness. We ease into them. It takes time of holding our attention in one place before we actually get to that place. But when we do, not only do we perform better, we actually get a lot less tired. Now, we're only human, eh? And this stuff's tempting. So what can we learn about how to avoid it? Should we resist it? Well, it turns out the research says we're no good at resisting, because if you hear a notification on a phone and you think, I'm going to resist that, your cognitive performance drops because part of your brain sucked away to think, I wonder what it was really about. And actually, that's, I think, part of why when you put your phone on the table, the other person that you're having dinner with likes you less, because I think they know that part of your attention is sucked away. So resisting doesn't work that well. But what does work? Well, we can learn a lesson from the people who have super strong willpower. They're no better at resisting the chocolate cake when it's placed right in front of them. But actually, they're really good at coming up with good habits that allow them never to put the chocolate cake in front of them. They avoid it. We can avoid it too. The off switch is a terribly useful thing. Yeah. Now, one simple thing, even if you did no less stuff, if you did exactly the same amount of activity you currently do, if all you did is switched a lot less, you maybe clustered your email together into big lumps, and you allowed your attention to linger longer on some of the important stuff, not only would you perform better, you'd feel a lot less busy and much less exhausted. Because this is the heart of the matter, actually. The opposite of busy isn't relaxing on a beach. The opposite of busy is, despite all this noise, been able to bring sustained, focused attention onto the people or the problems that matter in your life? Now, often at this point, someone will stick their hand up and say, yeah, but what about me? You may be thinking this too. You don't understand my life. I've got 7 children. I'm a single parent. I run $6 billion projects. I've got 2 sick parents and a dog with leukemia. What about me? Surely I haven't got a choice. Really what they're looking for is absolution. They're hoping that I'll say, you know what, you're right, you have no choice, because there's a comfort in thinking, I have no choice here. But it is a bit of a delusion, and busy is a bit of procrastination. I worked with a senior leader at Microsoft a little while ago, a corporate vice president who ran a $1 billion business, had a global role, loads of travel. And he had 4 children. And he stood in front of a group one day and he said, I've never missed a child's birthday. I've never missed my wife's birthday. I've never missed our anniversary. I've never missed the first day or the last day of term. I've never missed the first night of a school performance. And we all sat there and thought, how does he do that in that role? What he'd done is he'd sat with his family and recognized he was going to have to make sacrifices because he couldn't have it all if he did that job. And so they talked about what was really, really important to them. And what they decided is there were certain moments in their lives that were sacred, and that his being present at all of those demonstrated to his family and to himself that they came first. The thing is, which only works if we're choosing between good options. If all we're doing when we're choosing which is choosing between the relatively important, unimportant stuff that we typically put on to-do lists, we're not really making much progress. But attention naturally is sucked towards the obvious and the clear. And so if we don't get super clear in the way the leader did about not the generality of our values, but actually really specifically what matters to us, then in the daily choice that we have to make about what do we do next, it's natural that the attention magnets of our inbox and our to-do list is going to win. So one of the things I do on a simple level is I start every day just with a few minutes of looking at my 4 values, the 4 biggest values, and asking myself in a really concrete way, what can I do to move those forward today? By doing that, what I'm hoping to do is insert a bit more of the important into my choice. So whenever I'm thinking, what do I do next? I don't just flit straight to the most obvious. I actually, at times, make better which choices. Because busy isn't a choice that we make all up. We don't choose to be overwhelmed. We don't choose to be frantically busy and therefore exhausted all the time. And we don't choose to slowly fail to focus on the stuff that's most important to us. But our choices cumulatively do add up to that. But like the Siamese fighting fish, or unlike the Siamese fighting fish, we have a choice. We can choose a different path. Now, a little while ago, I was terribly busy. And I came downstairs and I bumped into my daughter. And she wanted some of my attention. And I caught myself in the act of choosing busy over my daughter. I used to say, just a minute, which is a great line with any parent to put the kids off, because by the time you're ready for them, they've obviously moved on to something else. But anyway, I caught myself in the act of doing that. And I made a different choice. And what she wanted to do was dance. So we danced. And we danced for a couple of minutes, and as a 4-year-old, she was done then, and she skipped off quite happy onto something else. But it was a beautiful butterfly moment that, quite frankly, I'll never forget. So as you leave here today, my invitation to you is catch yourself in the act more often. Catch yourself in the act of choosing whether or not, rather than which. Catch yourself in the act of choosing to switch rather than to linger for longer on the important stuff. And catch yourself in the act of choosing the obvious rather than the important. And catch yourself in the act of choosing busy over the big stuff or the butterfly moments. Thank you.